my apologies for running late. Of course, the baby pooped, right? Like at 1 minute to 11. So with a little help from my 16-year-old daughter, everything is okay. All 10 kids are all safe. Everything's fine. So a few minutes late, my apologies. In case we haven't met, my name is Tara. I'm a Christian wave homeschool mom of 10, almost 11 children, about halfway through my pregnancy with baby 11. And I have a heart to help other moms embrace the blessing of children with joy and confidence. So funny story, next to the whole poop incident, is like that always happens, right? We need to go out the door or go live. I had never heard of homeschooling until I think I was like 26 years old. We were at Bible college in the States. I live in Canada. And yeah, like somebody in the student body, like a freshman student, was talking, we're just chatting like at the table, and someone mentioned homeschooling, and I was like, what? Come again? She's like, yeah, I was homeschooled. And I was like, what? I didn't even know the word. So she described it to me, and I honestly, like, I'm a very literal person. So I thought she was just like making a joke, and it was kind of a joke at my expense. I was starting to feel a little embarrassed. And I was like, no, that's not even real. Like, that's like purple unicorns, right? And she was really confused. She's like, no, like I did my school at home. And like, here she is, like going to college, taking a program in cross-cultural studies like me. And I'm like all of these like prejudices I didn't even know I had, or all these thoughts and emotions started coming to my mind. So I didn't even believe it was real. And then of course, once I was like, okay, well, she's not lying. I'm like, that can't be legal. I've never heard of such a thing. Because turns out, like, there are homeschoolers. There's millions of them in the United States. There's many of them, like hundreds of thousands in Canada. They just don't really typically draw attention to themselves, but they're there. And fast forward a few years, now I've got 4 kids under 4, and having to seriously think about school, because school typically starts, at 4 years old. We call it 4-year-old kindergarten here in Canada. I'm not sure what it's called in the States. So yeah, when I had 4 kids under 4, all of a sudden, those long years of motherhood were speeding up really quickly, and we had to decide really fast, what are we doing with our daughter? And that was a whole other story. When we decided to homeschool, the irony being I hadn't even heard about it, and I went into it honestly kicking and screaming, but that's another story for another day. Step 1 was to figure, like, where do I even start? I'm like, what are the laws? Like, what do we use? Like, how much time is this going to take? Like, I was overwhelmed. I honestly felt like scared. I'm like, am I even qualified to do this? Like, yeah, sure, I can keep kids alive, teach them how to use the toilet, but I don't have an educational degree. Like, all those things were coming up. I was definitely unsure, not sure who to talk to, because not only had I not heard of homeschooling, I didn't know any other homeschoolers. I never met one of them. They're kind of here and there. Like I said, they don't really typically draw a lot of attention to themselves, but they're there. I just didn't know kind of where they met, where they hung out. So I needed some guidance. And at the same time, though I wouldn't have admitted it out loud, I didn't just want to turn into some kind of robot mom who was following someone else's mothering style. Because I'd had a lot of that from very well-meaning older women in my life, like in my mom's generation, who, now that it was like, the next generation is having kids, they're suddenly giving tons of unsolicited advice, and they mean well, but it could be overwhelming. And I was like, I don't want to meet all these other homeschoolers, and they're just going to be like, be a cookie cutter just like me. So I had all this going on. And now here it is, 11 years later. No, more than that, because my oldest is 16 now. And I ended up starting her at 5, because I was kind of an eager beaver, like most homeschoolers. And I started earlier than I needed to. It turns out that legally here in Ontario, where I live, you don't actually technically have to start until the year they turn 6. But I was kind of like nervous and excited. So I was just like, let's just start at 5. Why not? I mean, she's a firstborn child. So like many firstborn children, she's quite bright, quite responsible, very much mimicking mommy's assertiveness and confidence. So I figured, why not? Let's get a start. So here I am 11 years later, happy to share. And a lot of people ask me now that I have almost 11 kids, we've been homeschooling the whole way through. I've got kids in high school, kids in the middle school years, and like beginners, and like littles in the house at the same time. I got the whole panoply. So when they ask me, hey, Tara, how do you homeschool? It's just so ironic, right? Where I was then and where I am now. And I'm happy to share. And a lot of women are moving, a lot of families are moving to homeschooling because there's just so many shifts happening in the world, in North America, which I'm not going to get into, so this doesn't get censored. You know what I'm talking about. So when people ask me, how How would you start homeschooling? I've got a couple of tips, and I can only share so much in a live. This is going to be like 10, 15 minutes tops, right? This isn't the comprehensive course. So I'll share with you some tips to get you started. And if you have any questions about this or you want to talk further, feel free to pop a comment below or check out the Joyful Confident Moms of Many Facebook group, which is the hub where I connect with other women to encourage them in homeschooling and big family life and just whatever it is. So we can be more joyful, confident moms, embracing the blessing of children with joy and confidence. So how do you start homeschooling, Tara? Well, number one, I'm going to ask you, who are just sitting, you and me hanging out, I would ask you, why do you want to homeschool? Like not an interrogation question, just a genuine, why do you want to homeschool? Because it really helps to clarify your why. With anything in life, but thinking of homeschooling, why do you want to homeschool? It's different for everybody. I have my reasons why I chose initially, and that's since been further crystallized and reinforced for me. But turns out there are other reasons why people homeschool. Not everybody's a Christian that homeschools. Not everybody homeschools the whole way through. People have different reasons why they do it. Maybe they're concerned about social issues, bullying kind of stuff, or their children have particular health needs and they need a flexibility to go to appointments or just keep their child maybe in a scent-free environment, or just other reasons that aren't maybe my situation, but we all end up at the same point. How do I homeschool and how do you get there? It's important to clarify why, because it's going to help you figure out how, which we'll talk about next. Also, knowing why you're choosing to homeschool will really help you persevere, because almost undoubtedly, you're going to run into two things. Other people's opinions, which I whimsically call OPOs. Okay, you're going to run into other people's opinions. Because I had opinions, and 2 seconds after I found out homeschooling was even a thing, right? Immediately I was like, how can that even be legal? How can that even be possible? How can that even be valid? How could you possibly get an education if you don't do it the only way I've ever known it to be done? All right, you're going to run into other people's opinions, probably in your family circles, because they mean well, grandparents with the grandkids. It'll help you kind of persevere against that well-meaning pushback, or maybe even some intense pushback, even sometimes from people you wouldn't have expected it from. So knowing why you're doing something will help you choose how. It'll help you persevere with opinions, and it'll help you overcome challenges. Because anything, new, you're going to encounter challenges how do I do this? How do I figure out that? How do I get support for this? You're going to run into dry days and days you don't feel like sunshine and rainbows, and homeschooling doesn't, make you spring into bed in the morning. Some days are going to feel like work, or the kids are going to be, any number of challenges are going to come up. So clarifying your why before you figure out how is number one. It's every conversation I have ever had with other moms who are thinking about homeschooling or have committed to homeschooling. I literally say, just pause for a second and tell me, so you can hear yourself say why. So you just want to grab a piece of paper after this live and or talk to yourself, or put it in the comments below. Why are you choosing to homeschool, or even just thinking of homeschooling if that's where you're at? So number two, once you've clarified your why, and your why can change, then you can figure out how. And it's easier with a why. Seriously, it's so much easier. And there's 3 R's that I've broken down. I love little handy tricks, makes my life easier, right? So being a mom is less complicated. It's nice to have tips and tricks and hacks and systems and little acronyms. So 3 R's to figure out how to homeschool. So the first one is regulations. Check the regulations in your area, because it's different state to state, province to province. Education isn't federalized, thank God. So you're going to, it's very helpful for you to know the boundaries of the law and what's expected of you, because there are some states that I'm aware of, and off the top of my head, there are reports into other different requirements, and there are other areas that are much more free. And right here, I'm very grateful for the people who've gone before me, in the 80s, who did homeschooling when there wasn't a lot of regulation and clarity, a lot more opinions, but now it's pretty well established. More than 5% of the educating population does homeschool. It's much more well accepted socially, a lot more options, and the regulations are more clear. So how would you figure that out? I would connect with another homeschooler. If you know anybody who homeschools, just shoot them a Facebook message or a text, or grab them in the street. You can also connect with your local homeschool group. And if you just Google homeschool group or homeschool association in my area, you'll find them. They've usually got groups on Facebook. They usually got a website, or some kind of chapter or association. They're well established. So though like me, may never even have heard of homeschooling or even met another homeschooler, they exist and they do meet together, and they usually have like monthly meetings, annual conferences, and they're just a wealth of knowledge and experience. People who are new, who are in the middle, or who like their kids have gone on, now they got grandchildren. So figure out the regulations by connecting with your homeschool association or just asking another homeschooler to kind of tip you off and point you in a good direction. The second R is resources. There's a lot of resources out there, and honestly, I can find it a little overwhelming. If you've ever been to a homeschool conference, they have like usually a gymnasium or a big conference room set up with all the like, I don't know, what would you call them? Like vendors who have their table set up and all of their wares and their books and their workbooks and their like amazing resources. And for some people, that's like kid in a candy shop feeling. For me, it was like sensory overload. I don't even like going into like grocery stores on the best day, especially now that we're all like wearing masks, but that's another topic. So it's just a lot. So I found it super helpful to just sort of like narrow down what my general approach was going to be. And again, this is just a live, this isn't like a very comprehensive course or big webinar, but we can really talk about it at length. Turns out there's lots of different sort of broad approaches. Some people like a more Montessori method or a more classical method. Some people enjoy more of a, off the top of my head, like just like buy it in a box. Just like send me everything right down to the pom-poms in my eraser. They just want everything like buy it in a box. But right at the beginning, let's say you're starting like I did when turns out legally 6 years old was the year to start. I just kept it really simple. I did what's called the do-it-yourself shoestring because we had a single income like most families who homeschool, and we just kept it really low budget. Plus it was like our first year. I was like, I don't want to bite off more than I can chew and really kind of overwhelm myself. So let's just do it really simple because I'm learning something completely new. I've never seen it. I never did it. So I was like gracious with myself, and I followed another handy acronym, the KISS acronym, which I've modified to be more gracious and keep it super simple. So I did a simple do-it-yourself shoestring method with the 3 R's, just reading, writing, arithmetic. I found a reading resource, just asked some other homeschoolers what they recommended. Found a writing resource, again, just asked other homeschoolers, like in a Facebook group. I did it in person, old school, and just picked 3 things and started with them. We've since tweaked them, and I've kind of tested out different math methods, different math, it's like resources. And now that I'm like 12 years in, I've really identified what works well for me. Third R is a routine. Just figure out a routine. And when your kids are just starting out like kindergarten or just like grade 1, level 1, it's going to be like 20, 30 minutes a day tops. And you can break that into 5-10 minute chunks. And I mean, this isn't like a rule, like a hardcore rule, and depending on like check the regulations or area, but broadly speaking, it's kind of like just get the job done that you set out to do. A lot of homeschoolers tend to be very gung-ho and they want to like do everything. They've got Spanish and Latin and they've got biology, and like some people are super gung-ho and they're like, this is taking forever. My 6-year-old, it's 6 hours into the day and he's not done. And little Susie's crying and it might just be too much. So I recommend keep it simple with your resources, keep it simple with your routine so you guys can get into a flow. We do it after breakfast. It's just like everybody's the freshest. It's just kind of nice to get it done. Do 20, 30 minutes while the littles are just playing in the living room. So they're just kind of like, I can watch them and be available for my student. And then the rest of the day is life. And life is learning, playing, baking, crafting, exploring, learning how to tie your shoelaces. So much of the early years of life are just learning by doing, by being, by discovering. So that's how we started in the very early years. So if you're just starting out, clarify your why. Figure out the 3 R's, the regulations, your resources, and your routine, and then boom, just get going. If you need some support and help, definitely I would recommend connecting with your local homeschool association, but I also know right now that can be easier said than done with just the time of history we're living in. So connecting with some homeschool groups, there's tons of them. I mean, not all groups are equal, and feel free to hop into the Joyful Confident Moms Facebook group in case you're not already part of it. I've got a link in the video. You can go ahead and connect with us there. Not everybody homeschools, but many in the group do. I certainly do. You can pop your questions in. I'm happy to connect with you there and be a resource to you because I've walked this road. And now here we are 11, almost 12 years later, and I get to help other moms in a way that I didn't have when I was at the beginning of my journey and overwhelmed and scared. So if I can help demystify the process, give you some support, and to point you some different directions, so you're not a cookie cutter mom, you're the mom God created you to be, homeschooling your children in a way that feels good and works in your life, I'm happy to be a resource to you. So feel free to ask to invite the group. I'll be like, hey, yeah, of course, come on in. It's so nice to meet you. So that's it for today. I will see you on Wednesday. And in Wednesday, we're going to talk about doing it in the middle years. Like what happens next once you're like, I kind of got this now, but then like those little kids that used to play in the living room, now they're joining the fray. Then we'll talk about that on Wednesday. So I'll see you then. God bless you until then, moms. I'll see you soon.